Welcome to Journey to Justice. I'm Eiko Kosasa, your host. Recently at the 2012 Kalaho'iho'i'ea, or Sovereignty Restoration Day event, I interviewed Dr. Lynette Hi'ilani Cruz, a retired professor of anthropology at Hawai'i Pacific University. Lynette always educates people about Hawaiian history and Hawaiian culture and emphasizes the need to restore an independent Hawaiian nation, whether in the classroom or in a community setting. In this interview, Lynette discusses her teaching philosophy and practices. I began by asking her where she was born and raised.
I was born on Hawaii Island, 1944. So you can tell I'm 68 now. You can tell I count the wrinkles. In 1944, and then my parents moved here when I was 5. So by 1949, I was here, and then here on Oahu, and grew up in, used to be a public housing in Manoa Valley. You wouldn't think, yeah. But it used to be a public housing, and I think what's there now is UH Press offices, right there. That was a public housing. I grew up over there, lived there, and for about, I don't know, a few years, and then we moved to Kapahulu and lived with my grandma in Kapahulu area. Then I went to high school from there, and then, yeah, that's where I grew up. I think I had 2 Hawaiian families over there.
Wow.
Because, you know, Hawaiians only lived in the housing, right?
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
Papakolea or Waianae or someplace. But
Yeah.
we lived in Kapahulu.
Okay, you know, for many, many years, you know, you've been an activist, a leader in the movement. So how did you come to political consciousness?
My sister and her family, my sister had 10 children, and her husband worked construction, and my sister and her family lived wherever they could afford to live. And you know, back then everybody had to lie how many kids they had, because if you told your landlord you had 10 kids, well, no, you can't move in. So what you do is you tell them, well, you get 2 kids, you hide 8 or whatever, and then as soon as you move in, then the rest of the kids can come, as long as the landlord didn't live next door, right? I mean, that's a reality of life for many people. And so my brother-in-law worked construction, and then during the rainy season when construction jobs were not often, right? Because you couldn't go work, it was raining, and then the income was less. They really suffered, because that means he didn't make enough money to pay the rent. And eventually they got evicted. They lived in Waimanalo, and they got evicted, and then they moved to the beach. I didn't know anybody lived at the beach back then, because I was kind of clueless, sleeping. Okay, so here they are living at the beach in Waimanalo, and we would go down there and visit with them, and I realized that there were lots and lots of people living at the beach, and many of them living in their cars, and many of them families with children. What a wake up call for me.
How old were you then?
I don't remember. This was in 1985, so definitely already an adult. Working and thinking the best that I could ever do is to work in a fast food restaurant. Graduated from high school, that was it. And so here's my sister living on the beach with her family. And then later on, everybody gets evicted from Waimanalo Beach Park, and then they end up at Sand Island. And then, so of course, we follow them, because we live in kind of dire circumstances ourselves, and there's no room for us to have a family of, say, 12. Unless, you know, we were okay with being evicted ourselves. So following my sister and her family to the beach, she lived in Waimanalo. She lived in Waimanalo, was in Waimanalo homeless. They moved to Sand Island, lived there. And when I went down to visit them numerous times, like every weekend, I realized that there were about, I don't know, 15 or 16 families living in tents on the beach. Then I realized that something is going on. So I spent a lot of my time just walking around and meeting all the people over there and talking to them and trying to figure out how did people get here, and what should we be doing about that, you know, and how could we help? Because nobody had money. It's not like we could set you up in a place and pay your rent or anything like that. So you might say it was like the beginnings of my activism. And at the same time, I had decided I was going to go back to school. So I went back to school And I was like in my first year of college, and I decided that I wanted to write about this phenomenon I thought was so new to me. Never, what do I know? So I went around and talked to people, and remember asking them, so why don't you guys start a newsletter? Even back then I was thinking, more people need to know, but I'm not in a position to tell anybody because I'm not in it. I mean, I'm not living here. And asking people if they wanted to do that. I remember going to Oha way back when and talking to Moani Kealaakaka and asking her, is there some way you can help? And I think what she did was, because they had discretionary funds back then, she gave me a check for like $200. And she said, if they're going to start their newsletter, you can help by printing it up. That was the first time I realized, wow, we could actually do something. So I was going around and asking people, do you want to write a little bit about what's going on? And it doesn't have to be perfect. You can write it by hand, and I can go home and type it up because I had a typewriter. Nobody had computers back then. And so we started doing this little newsletter kind of thing, so all the families knew how all the other families were feeling and doing, but people outside would also know that there was something going on. So you might say that was the beginning. At the same time, I'm going to school and I decide I should write about this.
Yeah. So in the end, is that what your dissertation?
No, my master's thesis was on homelessness in Hawaii, and I will say this, it's because around like 1989, I think the feds passed a law to deal with the issue of homelessness, and it was not well known in Hawaii, but a certain amount of money came down here, I think like $6 million for programs to help with homelessness. And like for me, it's like, what is that? Because the guys at the beach never thought of themselves as being homeless. I remember asking my nephew, he said, hell, I'm not homeless, I live right over there. I mean, so,
Yeah.
they were just talking about their life. And when this money came down, what happened was a whole kind of like proliferation of homeless organizations. They could apply for funding, and they could help with, I don't know, programs, food, whatever, as long as they could keep the numbers and see how many people were being hosted or helped or whatever. And then I began to see how government operates. So you see a problem, you toss a bunch of money at it, a group will form itself, apply for those funds, and go out there and help, right? Whatever that means. So that was what was happening back then. Now, because of the idea, back then, because of the idea of a program, the definition of who was homeless and what homelessness was began to change, because you kind of had to fit the federal definition. And a homeless person was a person who lived in a non-conventional dwelling. Non-conventional could be tent, could be, I don't know, I guess on the continent it's cardboard boxes, but not here. A tent or whatever. And then if you started to ask people who lived on the beach, and before that they called themselves beach people.
That's right.
Now they started to call themselves homeless, because in order to get counted and to get some kind of benefit, even if it was just like food stamps, you had to be homeless. So you see the definition and self-definition and descriptions of people changing. It wasn't just Hawaiians too who were homeless or who became homeless. All kinds of people, Haulis, and they had one couple who was black, and Filipinos, no Japanese to my knowledge, but most of them were Hawaiian. So that's kind of when I started wondering why that was. And then it was like going through the system, calling this person, calling that person, asking for help, and sort of familiarizing myself with the fact that government says this and apparently tries to do this, but isn't very successful. And the information that we had about how government functions kind of didn't jive with what we were seeing, and I wasn't the only one. And so you might say dawning awareness. So I started figuring out, holy crap, what the hell is going on? That's why I wrote my master's on that. And I think the one thing that came out of it for me was that people didn't see the future. I don't know how many people I asked this. I said, what do you see for yourself in the future, 5 years from now, 10 years? And I realized that after asking that question for a while, because a follow-up question was why or why not, people who didn't understand their own genealogy, for example, the most they knew about their genealogy was like their grandparents, they didn't seem to vision themselves very far into the future. Seriously, not even a year. And those who understood who they were, where they came from, what their genealogy was, and where their families were from, they actually saw themselves into the future. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting for me, because I didn't know where that came from, but you might say it just sort of popped up. I wasn't looking for it. So then I began to see that if people understood themselves, could identify themselves, their relationship to place, now and in the past, they could probably envision themselves in that place in the future.
Wow.
So that was like my big, aha moment.
That's powerful. Yeah.
So I go to school. I graduate. I shift focus from anthropology. Well, actually, I was a psych undergrad to Pacific Studies. But I'm actually really interested in anthropology. And I move on to college, East West Center, to get my master's. And I became a grantee at East West Center. So then a new thing starts for me, because the first thing I'm noticing is that, damn, everybody here is white. I remember asking myself, why is this place called East West Center? And everybody looks more like West. Nobody looks East. And then I was cautioned back then to not speak in that way, and that I shouldn't call that fact to attention, that how is it that everybody here is white? But I did ask that, I remember. So you might say I started noticing things and trying to figure out what the heck was going on. And then I took a course from Haunani K, and I think that was kind of like, oh my God, and her insistence on actually looking at the historic record. And when I started to read it, and that's all of our testing was on that, what does the historic record say? And so based on that, what is going on? So yeah, I think I grew up in her class.
Well, it's interesting what you're talking about, your master's thesis, on how you could see if people didn't know who they are, it's like the government's giving you this identity,
Yes.
Suddenly they were homeless rather than they lived over here at this place.
So you're talking about people who who maybe didn't have much schooling, formal schooling, and if they did, they certainly didn't learn anything about history and not Hawaiian history. But those who were real clear where their people came from, they could hold on to that, and they could point at it. Because my grandparents used to be farmers, blah, blah, blah. I grew up here, I know how to do this, that, and the other, and I think they were much more entrenched in identity connected to land. And the rest of them seemed to be floating around.
Yeah. Wow.
Because even like the Filipinos that I interviewed, they didn't really talk much about Philippines. I guess they were like already second or third generation in Hawaii, and maybe could not relate to that place, but neither could they relate to this place. So,
To me, it's important, like being Japanese, and my mother went back, after Roots came out. She went back to
We all
Japan.
did, yeah.
And she was trying to trace it back, and so it went quite a ways back, but it did. It gave me something to realize I'm from over there. So then it became easier in understanding what's going on over here. It's interesting.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking, when you were talking earlier about how you took that class from Haunani K, I remember being in her class and we read David Malo's Hawaiian Antiquities. And I remember this one section where he talked about the mountains, and there were levels, and the tree levels, they all had different names. And I realized in my mind, it's all blank, because our schooling isn't connected to Hawaii. We're learning American continental things. And that just kind of blew my mind.
I guess everybody was afraid of her because we had lots of people, well, a few Hawaiians in the class and many who weren't. And those who weren't Hawaiian generally should know better than to ask stupid questions, but asked them anyway, and they really got the business. And I thought, oh, you're really pretty dumb. I mean, I wouldn't ask that, right? There's a kind of training thing going on for me, I think, to listen more and pay attention because it may not come around again,
Yeah.
but also to be able to use that information that it was useful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you might say, I think I got grounded there. Grounded meaning that paying attention to what was being said and then trying to find its relevance in my life.
So then when you went on to do your doctorate, what did you do your doctorate on?
Hawaiian nationalism, because by then, this is a lot of time elapsed. So I graduated from Hawai'i Pacific University in 1987. In 1988, I went to UH Manoa into the East West Center and finished my master's in 1990 with that particular paper. And then from 1990 to 2000, I stayed enrolled 1 credit in the PhD program and went back to work because we were poor.
Yeah.
So I never really finished. I wasn't thinking about finishing, just staying enrolled just in case. And then in I kept getting these extensions. And then finally I got a letter from the graduate division saying, if you don't graduate, we're dropping you. And I said, I'm graduating right now. And I wrote them a letter. I said, I'll graduate next year. I quit my job and I just wrote for 3 months straight. Interestingly, I had like 15 years of data that I had been gathering all that time. So you might say on the very first pass, I wrote it from memory. I wrote my first draft just going in my head genealogically, starting from 1990 to 2003, a 13-year period, and I wrote about that. Then I went back and put in all my citations and all other relevant materials and references because it was so fresh in my head, because it was kind of like living the life. I mean, I was doing it every day, and I had to pick and choose what to put in because it was too much. And then I had complaints because it was too long, and then I had to take stuff out, like 100 pages of it. But by then I didn't care. The reality was, it was outdated when I wrote it, and I didn't care.
What do you mean it was outdated?
It's kind of like I ended up writing a kind of history of the movement up to the present time. And then of course when I was finished, it was kind of old because so much had changed right after it. And I thought, what should I do? Who cares? Submit as it is. I did minimal changes and then it was over. And I was so happy. Not that I cared so much about getting a PhD, but because it was kind of hanging over me. And I had already been cautioned several times by others about unfinished work or unfinished business, to not get into the habit. If you're going to start it, finish it.
Right.
So I had to finish it.
And then you went on to teach at Hawai'i Pacific University, right? And I know you always would take your students out to trips so that they could actually see different places.
Right.
Is that what you were doing, grounding them into like?
Kind of, yeah. But that actually started at UH, when I was teaching at UH, because like most teachers, we teach every place. Yeah. Teaching at HPU, teaching at UH, teaching at like KCC, teaching here, there, and everywhere, any place I could get a job.
Right.
But when I was at UH, I already started this program where you try to introduce students to a place that you're already talking about in class, to see if they could. Sometimes the place being your presence makes an issue much more real than just reading about it. And I found that it was really, really popular and students really liked it. And then I got offered a position working at HPU full-time in 2003, and I took it. And then it became a regular program, a full-fledged program in the anthropology program, And I think we scheduled like 12 or 14 field trips a semester. So every single weekend was somewhere. Um, and after reading student evaluations for, 7 years or so, I'm finding that the students really, really appreciated that, because prior to that, they knew nothing about this place called Hawaii. So for them, they may have well have been in like Florida or California, except for the fact that they were introduced to a place which is something that was really different for them.
Wow.
You gotta ask yourself, why would that be important? Well, there's teaching and there's teaching. You can teach inside a classroom, which is an artificial environment with freaking air conditioning and crappy lights. However, you have a whiteboard and you have access to video, but it's very unreal. So is it better than to be teaching on site? I actually ask my students, is it better for you guys if we're teaching here, or is it better if we're teaching out in a place? And everybody said out. Nobody wanted to be in class. So we would do field trips during class. If I had a 3-hour class, for example, we'd meet at the site and we'd do a tour, and we have people who host us because they're from that place, give us history and information, and students had the ability to retain much better the information that they were getting, but also the quality of their papers started to improve because it stopped being kind of like a head trip. Basically, the experience of it all made stuff real that wasn't real before. They could imagine it, but not as well as actually being there.
So they're integrating, it's part of your thing, they're integrating their experience with their knowledge,
Yes. Yeah.
Then it stays.
It does stay, but also it gives you a kind of appreciation for a place. Because it gave me an opportunity to talk about Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian values and what it means when you're on a place or in a site. And for example, one time we built this ahu. You know what an ahu is? And it was right after the tsunami in Japan. And people came to school feeling really depressed, and a lot of my Japanese students had left. They didn't know what to do. They just went wherever, but they had to deal with that. And the rest of us felt badly for them. And so we went outside in the back of the school. HPU has a wonderful windward campus, it's like right up against the mountain. Went in the back. And we met under the trees. And in the back is all kinds of, it's like a mini forest with all kinds of flowers, trees, fruits, stuff like that. And I said, if we wanted to send our good wishes and our good energy to Japan, to the people of Japan and to the land, because they have suffered a tremendous injury, harm, could we do it here? And then we talked about the idea of proxy. We talked about John Kaimikawa, who is a kumuhula who also taught at HPU, and his explanation that proxy, you can do things by proxy if you cannot be there, because the intention is the same and the energy is the same. And if we wanted to build something that gathered all our good energy using what's available, could we do that? And everybody said, we could try. Okay, so me, walk around, you guys. You got 5 minutes. You want to find something in nature, it can be anything at all, that you can use as a symbol of your good energy. You're going to send it, get it, gather it. See, the students are walking all over in the bushes, and that's all cool. And then they come back, and then somebody has like a guava, somebody has a leaf or a fern or a twig or a stone, whatever. And then we put it all there's a tree back there, so we put it all in front of this tree, and then we make the assumption that your good energy went into the selection of this item, and then it's put there as joint energy, big energy. And we stand around in a circle. Okay, let's all hold hands. Who wants to share their thoughts? And we go around the circle, and everybody's like really into it, And then it's really good. Okay, we're sending our energy. Okay, that's done. We go back into the classroom, because it's a break now, right? Yeah. And the first thing that somebody says to me is this young haole guy. And he says, I knew I shouldn't just take anything I wanted, that I should actually ask, what is the appropriate thing? And he said, this fern went like this. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, it waved at me. And I said, so what did you do? He said, so I picked it and I put it over there. And when he said that, all the other students started talking about similar kinds of experiences because they wanted to do what was appropriate and all that. Okay, what I'm saying is, if you give students the opportunity to interact with nature without me, right? Just go. You know what the purpose is, our intention. Go do what needs to be done. And in that way, you become attuned. It's not about me.
Yeah.
So you do the thing that you got to do, and you know what? If that works and it works for you, and we don't know if it didn't work,
Yeah.
what's to prevent you from doing that again? So that's the lesson. Go do your thing, and when you leave, take that with you. Your approach is important. It's respectful. Your intent is good. You don't know what wonderful things will happen because of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of what the field trips is, right?
Yeah.
The field trips, as you take them on a bus, you get them to the site, you let them go, you instruct them on kind of what's going on, and you tell them, look, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. You guys can tell by looking, right? Okay, walk around and figure it out. And then in 10 minutes, I walk around and everybody's like sitting on the ground, pulling weeds, cutting grass. I don't know what they're doing, raking. And I make the assumption that that place told them what to do. Because you know what? I don't have to be your teacher in the field, and I'm not your mom.
Yeah.
You see what tools are available. Go do what needs to be done, because your presence here needs to make a difference. So that's kind of what the future program is meant to do.
But because you're teaching them a different way of thinking. Like, what does a place want you? I mean, to me, that's,
Certainly,
anti-hegemonic.
certainly hope so.
Yeah.
Because as soon as they understand that that place can be significant to you, regardless of who you are,
Yeah.
regardless of where you come from, if you see merit in the work that you do and value in the place that you're at here in Hawaii, you'll see it when you go home. And yes, do go home. And go home and go visit your place and love your place, wherever it is,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's got to be beneficial globally. So you might say this is kind of like world peace, one person at a time. If your interaction with the land is kind and loving, then basically I think you're being taught how to interact with people. You practice on the land. You're kind to the land. You love it. It thrives. It's happy. It's healthy.
Yeah.
Go do that with people. Make your life and your community better.